All right, how's everybody doing today? Thank you all for joining us for Ask an Angler Spawning Bass Fishing Tips. So today we're going to kind of cover that, period just right before the spawn and then into the spawn. Anybody who received the email and that link for our video to go watch all of our archive videos, the third one down that back from January was pre-spawn bass fishing tips. So we're going to start kind of like right where I left off on that one, which is, fish pushing up past those primary points, secondary points into those, back areas. And then we're going to talk about how we're going to target those fish. So we'll start out here just giving a little brief overview of the fish themselves, what they're looking to do at this time of year. So right now we're last couple of days of March, weather's getting hotter, water temps are picking up around the state. There are places down in, central part of the state, southeast part of the state that are already reporting pretty good pre-spawn activity. So that's fish that are pushing up. They've moved out of their wintering holes at this point. They're in those staging areas and they're working their way towards their spawning beds. So they're just looking to gorge on, anything they can get a hold of, mostly shad and other bait fish. So we're going to talk about what types of baits that you can use, both from a boat angler or a bank angling perspective, and, how you can get up in there to really maybe catch a personal best, catch a lot of fish. This is a really fun time of year. Fish are super active. And, right up until the point where those big females are dropping eggs, you have a chance to catch, a personal best, some of your biggest fish of the year. And then you're also going to get into that hot and heavy bite of picking up all of those male fish that are really doing a lot of the work. They're building the beds, defending the nests, they're getting ready. And most of those fish, they're going to be in between 1 and 3 pounds, which super fun to catch. You can catch a lot of them. We're getting into that time of year where going out bass fishing. I mean, you may catch 50, 60, 70 fish on a body of water in a day here in the next few weeks. So we're right there. One thing I can bring up really quick, which is exciting to me. Here's our weather forecast. So this is central Oklahoma. And I've highlighted some things. So over here, we have our wind direction. So here's today, we got north wind. Tomorrow, we got north wind. But our highs are, up there in the 60s. So afternoon, this north wind doesn't really do much, but fishing's going to pick up towards the middle to the end of the day. That wind's going to drive up. Fish are going to push up. That water temperature in that shallow water heats up. But what we're really interested in is over here on our overnight lows. So here is, today, tomorrow, Thursday and Friday. And then Friday, we really start to see push into Saturday. Then we see our overnight lows. All those ones that are highlighted, that's all over 50 degrees. That's what we're looking for. We're not so much concerned with what our daytime highs are, not even really so much concerned with what our wind direction is. We'd like it to be out of the west. We'd like it to be out of the south. But even if it's not, as long as it's not pushing in Arctic air, the north wind is really just kind of bringing in high pressure, bluebird skies, makes the fish a little bit finicky. You want a little bit of breakup on the water. But super exciting that we're moving into, 10 straight days of well over 50 degrees for the lows. That's going to stabilize those water temperatures, which means come next week, you're going to see a lot of crappie activity. Those crappie are going to push up. And those bass are not far behind when we're in that spawning cycle. So having said all that, let's just kind of get into fishing. I have a plethora of baits in front of me. So we're going to talk about how we're going to catch fish in streams and rivers, how we're going to catch them in lakes, and how we're going to catch them in ponds. Which one of these baits we're going to use, I'll tell you what my top choice is on each of them. But all of these are tried and true catch fish. It's really just up to you as the angler. What's your personal preference? Are you a finesse person? Are you a power angler? You like cast and retrieve? Do you like, steady popping? And it's just up to you. That's the fun part about fishing. So we're going to go through all of that right now. So I'm going to start with hard baits. We'll go through that. We'll work our way into the soft plastics, and then we'll kind of go through the presentations of each, and then what those fish are keying in on it this time of year, how you're triggering reactions from them to get bites. Because during that pre-spawn, they are looking to gorge. So presentation is probably not as important. But then once they move up onto those beds and they start spawning, you might see a big female sitting on the bed and you might throw casts at her for 6 hours before you finally get a strike. And is it the bait? Is it the color? Is it just she finally decided she's had enough? So we're going to go through all that and go. So starting with hard baits, let's just start with the most basic lip crankbaits. Our shad populations in Oklahoma, gizzards, threadfin. We had a pretty big die-off of threadfin with the massive cold front that came through in February. So threadfin populations throughout the state are going to be on the very low end this year. Personally, I think that's going to increase bite rate for anglers. I think we're going to see a lot more people having success on artificial lures for all species because that's affected the prey base. But whether or not bass are keying in on, does it need to be a gizzard? Does it need to be threadfin? Does it need to be a bluegill pattern? That's all for you as an angler to find out, but we're going to go through that. So here I have 9 lip crankbaits in front of me, and these are kind of just tried and true colors. Not, I'll tell you which ones I like in clear water, which ones I like in stained water, which ones I like in dirty water, but we'll start going through them. So we got our 2 classic, just basic white. We have a square bill here, and then we got a medium diver. So these ones, this is always what I'm going to start with, whether I'm in clear water or stained water. This is just a pattern that if I want to just cast and retrieve, if I'm on a boat, on a bank, I'm working points, anything where I know that I'm not really digging down into grass, because that's where the treble hooks will mess you up. But if I'm just banging it across hard structure, I'm banging these into logs, I always start with white. It's just tried and true. This will catch big fish. It'll catch a lot of fish. So I start with white. Our next patternation are going to be more of our threadfin patternations. So we got kind of that blue back with more of a white. Then we got some of the yellow with the blue. So this is that keying in for threadfin. It's that blue coloration across the back with streaks of yellow and then a white underbelly. These are also very good lures. These are my second choices if I'm on most bodies of water, is something like this. And then it's kind of a gambit. You could go with something that's kind of the chartreuse. If you're in some stained water, this is going to not only pick up your black bass species, but anywhere where there's white bass, hybrid striped bass, this lure is going to do very well in stained water. Here is more of a northern perch coloration. Fire tiger is typically the color that they call it on the packaging when you see it. This can be very effective sometimes. Sometimes this one just gets a lot of bites. Now, we don't have northern perch in Oklahoma. 6-inch perch, they look just like this. But we have a lot of species of fish in Oklahoma that are native to northern waters that have seen log perch. It's in their DNA. Sometimes this is just the hot ticket. It can be that little orange underbelly that really does a good job of mimicking your bluegill population, especially some of those brighter colored sunfishes that have the really red underbelly mixed with that dark back. This does a really good job of that. And then, just something like a golden shiner type deal, your red craw. These ones perform really well in stained water, clay stained water, especially. What you're really looking for, there's 3 types of water in Oklahoma. We have clear water on the eastern part of the state, and then we have clear water in the southwestern part of the state. As we move our way into central Oklahoma, north central, and then any of the prairie inflowing waters on the northeast, you're going to have more of that chocolatey color, red color. Around central Oklahoma, you get a lot of that dingy water where it's not quite all the way red outside of like Lake Thunderbird and the south end of Lake Arcadia. You see more of that kind of brown silt. So you're looking at a water clarity of maybe 1 to 2, 3 feet in there. And that's where your red colorations, your white colorations, and your chartreuses, they're going to perform really well in that, kind of stained water. Now, when you get into if you're fishing a farm pond, you're fishing a lake that's just really that red color. You want to stick with reds, something like this, whites. If you've ever pulled the fish out of a farm pond that went from being somewhat clear to being completely chocolate milk or red for a few days and you pull a fish out and it looks like it's a ghost, they lose that pigmentation really fast. That happens to all those fish species in a body of water. You can't get that light penetration. So when you're focusing on any predator species with any of your baits, when you're in that dark colored water, that really red clay, light colors, white, red to match the color. When you get into the dingy water, now we're looking for the brighter chartreuses, blues, greens, lime greens. Whites are still effective. You may even elect for, something that's just a straight silver shine. But once you start to get into clear water, very clear water, we want to start sticking with more natural colorations. So, something like this that might be like a shiner that's in the water. Something like this that's going to be like your gizzard shad. They're getting lots of light penetration. They're producing that. Any of your bluegill color patternation. That's what you're looking for. And then our lipless crankbaits, I stick with red no matter where I go. Just red craw, lipless crankbaits. You can bang these off of stumps, logs, rocks. They hold up really well. If you just want to cover a lot of water, make a lot of casts, rattle traps, Bill Lewis rattle traps, any of the lipless like Strike King, red colorations. You can elect to use the silvers and the golds and things like that. I stick with red. It just, in Oklahoma and a lot of the South, red just happens to be the color when you're running those rattle traps. Seem to be the most effective. Now, if you want to go more for like a hard, like a jerk bait, like a ripstop Rapala, or just the old school Rapala, something like this, where you just pause, shakes, slow rise, pause, shake, slow rise. All you're doing, turning over that reel handle real quick, pause, flutters up, pause, pause. And what happens is those bass that get in on them, all these are doing is they're shaking and they're moving. You're stimulating that lateral line and they're following behind it. And these things, when you're cranking them, are just doing this. But when you pause, they slowly do that. That's 95% of your bites they want to follow it. And the second it pauses, boom, they hit it. And those are fun. So all these hard baits, these are your fun power fishing. If you're into, I don't want to watch my line, I don't want to, hold my finger on the line, power baits, this is the best time of year to really get after fish, especially in the backs of those creeks. So as those fish are moving back, look for structure that's coming out in the water. Is there a secondary point that runs out? Is there maybe a big tree that's fallen in that's, going, running from the bank all the way out into 10, 12 foot of water, just a big enough tree where those bass are, sitting out a little bit deeper, but they're going to move up in the water column at this time of year. They're going to get up on those flats. They're going to get up on those points. Wind direction becomes important at this time of year. Which way are your bait fish getting blown? Because all these fish you're thinking about right now is how much can I feed myself to get the energy that I need to complete this spawning cycle. So this is probably other than the fall gorge that you get as they're getting ready to go back into wintering mode and they're just trying to load up on shad. This is the one time of year where you can really get into a lot of fish all over a body of water using hard baits, spinner baits. I stick mostly whites, chartreuses, blues, streaks of red in them. These are mimicking your basic bait patterns that are out there. If you want to throw something on, as a trailer with one of these, things like, split tails, like little flukes, you can pair those up nicely on the back, throw them on as a trailer, throw that in there, just gives it a little bit bigger profile, or you can just throw it out with just the jig skirt on. But again, you're wanting to run those things, wind-blown points, wind-blown cover. Those fish are just going down their migration routes, and they are looking to get to where their eventual spawning areas are. And we're at the time of year now where they are fully out of their wintering holes. Water temperatures throughout the state are now warm enough where these fish should be pulling up into shallow water during the course of the middle of the day. That sun gets out, if you got a lot of wind break that's going on, 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they're just going to be out there feeding and gorging. The morning hours probably are still a little slow in shallow water, but the evening times, after they've run those fish around those points and those secondary points, you're going to get some fish that are going to suck up into the really shallow water in the evenings right now, especially on southern wind days, blowing, water displacement, moving 2-3 degrees warmer water up into those shallows right before dark. Bait fish want to suck up into that. They like to, sun themselves. But it's really important that you're looking for windy days. It doesn't need to be gale force, just enough to break up the surface of the water. If it's bluebird skies, flat water, focus back out into that deeper water off of those points. That's where you're going to run your jigs, your swim jigs, maybe a big swim bait to get down there. But those fish are going to hunker down. If we get any type of water displacement on the top and you see that, broken water, especially on southern wind days now, they're going to start pushing up to gorge in, anywhere from 12 to 4 feet of water. And they're going to be looking through there. You might even watch for fish that are rising. You might see if you get a bunch of shad or something like that, that push up to the top, that's what you're looking for. But hard baits right now, next few weeks in most parts of the state, we're probably going to get into the bass spawn here down in the southeast part of the state, probably next 2 to 3 weeks. Water temperatures are really starting to get there quickly. Central Oklahoma is where I'm based out of. I've noticed the last couple of weeks, bass fishing middle of the day, later on into the day, those bites are really starting to become more of that aggressive chase bite as opposed to working something finesse and just trying to bang it through cover and structure and, get that fish's attention. They're really starting to key in on lateral lines stimulation, going after that. So great time of year if that's the type of fishing you like to do. Spinner baits, crankbaits, lipless crankbaits, jerk baits. And again, keeping it as close to your coloration as possible, because those fish are keying in on their natural food source. So you want to keep it in those shad colorations, bluegill colorations, crappie colorations, whatever that local prey base is on the lakes and the rivers and the ponds you fish. Stick to what those forage base colors are. And then if your water's stained, a little bit brighter. If it's completely clay, whites, silvers. You get into the clear water, darker colorations. And as we get closer, right when you get in, right before the spawn, especially in clear water, those bluegill colorations, patterns like that, you're going to start seeing a lot of crossover on spawn. A lot of these fish use similar spawning habitats. So the crappie are moving up to spawn. Those bass are going to come in right behind them. And then you have the bluegill that are sitting in there, and they're trying to pick off eggs and fry and feed as well. So that's where those bluegill paterations, as those bass are pushing up right as the crappie are finishing their spawn, you get really into, throwing some bigger profile baits where those bass are just getting ready to spawn, but they want a couple more big meals before we get there. And then, like I said, on a very warm day, especially in the evenings, middle of the day, out on, points that are coming down and kind of shallower water, if you see some rises or maybe you see bait fish up on the top, things like a little buzz bait, you can drop a trailer behind this. That's, you could throw a little paddle tail on the back of this. Again, you could go with like a little fork tail, little fluke, put that behind it. Just something that you can keep up on the top. But I would stick with these only when the wind's blowing. If you have really calm water, if you think that you can get bit on the top, especially in that shallow water, things like a real dark jitterbug, something that you're just moving slow, just a little bit of water displacement, especially in clear water that's calm, darker colors. This frog, hollow body frog right here, when this is sitting on the top, this actually looks very similar to a bluegill when it's on the top. So you don't want to work this very much. Just a little twitch, 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 pause. A lot of times, especially in clear water or in ponds where you can really see the bass, you can actually see the fish behind it. And it's just kind of working underneath it, and you're twitching it. And, for no rhyme or reason, just something that triggered that fish. It could be the pause where it wants to come up and grab it, or it could be just sitting right there. And the next time you twitch it, just reactionary, just grabs it. But, top water, most people think of at post spawn, the early summer months as they start looking for terrestrials. But don't discredit like hard body frogs or hollow body frogs, excuse me. Like these do a very good job of mimicking a bluegill. If you ever just sat and kind of watched bluegill, especially under like tree branches that fall over, berries fall into the water, bugs fall into the water, you always just have some bluegill that are just hanging right up on top. They'll come up and smack the water every now and then. And you'll see those shadows down there of just some, real nice bass that just want to come up and grab that. So don't always think of the bait that you're using as mimicking what it's supposed to be. I mean, this is supposed to be a frog, but in all reality, this looks a lot like a bluegill. Especially when you fish it real slow and it's right on the top. If at any point I'm moving too fast, I didn't cover a topic well enough or something like that, put all of your questions in the chat bar. When we get to the end, I'll do a Q&A, but anything that comes up, this is supposed to be conversational. This is all for you guys. So ask your questions as we go along. I'll do my best to answer them, because I'm just going to kind of go through all of our baits, and then we'll talk about the presentations in which you can throw them out. So do you feel that most of the bass are still in the main lake? Fishing has been tough fishing the creeks that feed the lakes. Really just depends on where you are right now. Obviously north of I-40, it's going to be a little bit slower. The majority of fish, especially the bigger fish, are still going to be favoring those primary points off of those creek channels. They're off of their wintering grounds, but they're going to be holding to, structure and cover that's out in that deeper water. They're still coming out of that lull. We're just finally going into, when I showed the weather report at the beginning of this, we're just now getting into where we're going to see stable weather. So we've had big south winds pushing for 2 days, high temperatures getting up to the 80s, and then it drops right back off. The overnight low is, for one of the nights, 50. So you get like 36 hours of really good fishing, and then it kind of turns itself off. It gets, overnight lows are so cold that shallow water just drops again. So, depending where you're at in the state right now, if you're having trouble, anything shallow. Now, there's always going to be fish that hold shallow year round. They're not, that's just, every fish is different. The majority of a species kind of acts similar, but you're always going to have your offshoots. You're going to have fish that just want to hold in marinas year round, fish that want to hold up in rivers year round, fish that, really want to run out to those lake humps or main creek channels. But all of them at this time of year are starting to focus their efforts to where their spawning grounds are. So the majority of those spawning grounds for the majority of fish in the state, depending on the body of water, if you have lots of inflow, lots of, creeks that aren't just creek arms, they're actual creeks that you can go up in, some bass are going to push to the first primary point in that creek. That's where they want to spawn. They're going to get up on that flat. They're going to spawn. They're going to be out. Some of those fish are going to work their way all the way back. Some of those fish are going to keep just going up that creek, and they might go, half a mile up the creek and find an area to spawn. But if you're having trouble catching fish at this time of year, what I always advise anglers, like right now through the spawn, is start shallow. It's an easy process of elimination. If fish are shallow, they're biting. They're either biting or they're sunning. So you're either going to see them sitting there and you're like, okay, they just came up to get some sun. Those are typically on the days where there's no wind and they're just moving into that shallow. They're absorbing all that light energy. You'll see bluegill and bass and crappie, and they're just kind of hanging out real near the surface, top foot of the water column, just kind of cruising. They don't really seem to be that active. You might pick one or two off with like a very quiet presentation of, something weightless, like a little stick worm or a tube. But start shallow. If you're not getting bit, start working your way back out of that shallow water, out to the mouth of that arm, or if you're on a pond, out towards the, where you get the deeper drops, and then fish top down. So throw a buzz bait across a point, throw topwater across a point, see if you get anything to come up. Nothing, go to your shallow diving crankbaits, shallow diving or light swim baits that, you're going to keep in that top 4 foot of the water column. Work those points, work those secondary points, work any pieces of standing timber, any, boat docks, things like that. Anything that can provide midday cover, and keep your, start in the top half of the water column. Okay, still not picking up fish. Then start getting deeper in the water column. Start working your bladed jigs, swim jigs, bang just your normal bass jigs off the docks, off a cover, Texas rigged anything, stuff where you can, or on a jig head where you can just throw it into cover and let it dive down. These fish right now are moving into these covered areas because they're staging, but ultimately they're looking to feed on bait fish. They're looking to get those calorie rich food items. So they're waiting for something to go swim. They might be holding inside a couple of branches and they're looking for something to run on the outside. So always work shallow out and then top down, because if you work bottom up, when you get into those areas, if those fish are holding higher in the water column, you might spook a school of them, bringing a big jig up from underneath them, and you'll disperse them. And then they'll, takes them a little while to get back in there and settled in. So just like if you were fishing a river, fish close cast first, work your way back, and then work your way deeper into the water column. And that's all just to avoid spooking fish. You always want to pick off the easiest ones first, the ones most willing to bite. Those are going to be the fish in the shallowest water and highest up in the water column. The deeper out we get, the deeper that they get, those are the fish that are telling us we're still kind of just hanging out. We're getting adjusted. We're going to bite. If you give us you throw something in front of us we want, we're going to take it. But that's more of the slow finesse presentations. Whereas we're getting into that time where it's fun for every angler. A lot of people, they don't want to sit there and finesse fish all day. They don't want to throw a drop shot. They don't want to throw a Texas rig, something weightless, and just, 5 minutes per cast to get it back in. So this is the time of year where if you can work shallow out and then top water column down with search baits, spinner baits, buzz baits, lipped crankbaits, lipless crankbaits. Let me see. Of course, Alabama rigs, umbrella rigs. You want to cover a lot of water and figure out where fish are? Well, just throw that anywhere you want. If there are fish, something like this. Now, sassy shad work really well with these types of rigs. They're very short profiled, but they kind of have the deep body. You could run 5 curly tail grubs off of this. You could run, something like this off the back. These are all 1/4 ounce jig heads. So in total, this weighs about 1.5 ounces. So you're throwing this out on a pretty medium retrieve. You're going to keep this somewhere, 6 to 12 feet of water, but depending on how fast you're moving it in, and if there's any current or wind or things like that. But this is really, you want to search bait, search bait, search bait, search bait. Now, if you get in on a bunch of fish, that's where you can switch over to more of the finesse presentations. Okay, I found a nice piece of cover. There seems to be a lot of fish around it. I picked up 1 or 2 fish on my crankbait. I picked up a fish on a swim bait. Now you can, finish it off, work it around, work a Texas rig lizard, or work a drop shot out around it, and work those more finesse presentations. Work a jig, especially as fish get up on those points and they're really actively feeding on these bait fish. You might catch 4, 5, 6 fish in 10, 15 casts. You're like, okay, it's died down. Work back through it with a jig, 3 or 4 casts. See if you can't pick off one of those fish that's still down hanging on the bottom. Because this is really where fish start to congregate. Bass aren't what we would, call a true schooling fish. They're not like a white bass. They're not like a crappie or any of the temperate species, a walleye, where they really like to group together. Bass will form loose schools as opportunistic feeders. So you might get 6, 8, 10 bass in a loose formation, moving heavily to move bait fish around. And they're just kind of working with each other to school those bait fish where they want them, and then they all go in for the kill. But overall, bass are fairly solitary. They like to hold tight to cover, hold tight to structure. You may have a bunch of bass sitting on the same piece of cover, but every single one of those bass might be looking for something different. It might take something different to trigger it. But as these fish are moving into spawn, now they're all kind of in the same mindset. So that's where these search baits, your hard baits and your swim baits, it's the one time a year outside of that, very small window in the fall. Every body of water gets 1-2 weeks in the fall where you really pick that shad bite back up again. But we're looking right now at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks in a row of search baits picking up fish. So that's fun because it's constant action. You're constantly casting and retrieving. You can cover a lot of water, find a lot of fish. Flat side crankbait or square bill. Wasn't sure what water temp I should switch over. It really just depends on your prey base. One of the things that I tell anglers in all of these series is the way that you're really going to learn your body of water, pick up more fish than the person you're fishing with. Understanding the prey base. So when you're asking, should I use, a thicker, maybe a fuller body profile, something like this, where it's willow shaped, it's not really wide, but from a side profile, it's a fairly deep bodied profile. Whereas something like a jerk bait is longer, slender on all directions. That's going to come down to when those fish are keying in on a prey source. So if they're not just actively feeding, just and bass are opportunistic. That's why bass fishing is so popular. That's why, Bass Pro, these tournament series, they are a fish that can be caught so many different ways. Crappie, you can catch them 5, 6, 7 different ways, but ultimately crappie are looking for one thing most of the time. White bass, they're looking for one size profile, one color most of the year. Black bass, especially largemouth, they could be eating crustaceans, they could be eating snakes, ducklings, lizards, bluegill, crappie, shad. They're just kind of like a green dumpster in the water. They're opportunistic. However, they have adapted to where they're living. So if it's in a pond, if it's in a river, if it's in a major reservoir, how they relate to structure and cover, where they feel most comfortable in the water, they're going to look for prey sources that are easy to get. So they're opportunistic feeders. But there are times of the year when those fish key in. They are all looking for crawfish. Crawfish are coming out of their holes. It's crawfish season. Those fish have their eyes turned down. That's what they're looking for. This time of year, most of your bass are looking for shad or bluegill or bait balls. They're pushing into that shallow water. These warm days, they bring in those huge schools of bait. That's what those fish are relating to. So when we're talking about what size should you use, you're going to figure it out quick. I mean, if you're seeing fish, especially if you're on a boat, you can mark a bunch of fish with your electronics. If you're on a lake where you can throw a throw net, pull it up, look at the bait. Look what, are they real big shad? Are they, slender shad? Look at that and then base your prey or, what you're offering as prey off of that. Again, largemouth, it's probably more of a coloration thing as opposed to a profile. They got those big mouths on them. Is there a difference between this and something slender? Only if there's no prey base in that body of water that, would mimic something that's a fatter body. If every prey that they're looking for is a slender body, then yeah, stick with that. But you can find that out real quick, with the throw net. I tell people on the bank, drop in a worm, crappie nibble, catch the prey first. Oh, there's a bunch of bluegill up here. Oh, I'm catching some shiners. I'm catching gizzard shad, anything like that. Understanding that prey base is really going to help you as a bass angler because it just shows you right away. I do it a lot in ponds that I fish. Bluegill in different ponds that are connected by the same creeks that just have dams on them look different in those different ponds depending on the water clarity. So in some, they have more of that purple through the back, that purple shine. Other ones, they're real dark blue. And so I always base, what bait color I'm throwing on what I'm seeing from my prey species. So, when it comes down to actual pattern, what are they looking for? it's really more opportunistic as you as an angler to figure out what species are they going after. Are they looking for bait fish? Are they looking up for terrestrials? Are they looking for crawfish? Are they looking, or maybe they hovering, maybe they're just looking for one big meal. I just want to eat one bluegill that swims by me. We're gonna cover mostly artificial today, but there's no better bass bait than hooking a live 4 to 6 inch bluegill right between its dorsal fin and its tail fin and flipping it out around heavy cover. You do that, you're gonna find big bass all of the time, and that's something that a lot of times as anglers, you get caught up in your tackle box and everything, but at the end of the day, fishing is always very simple. You're just trying to mimic prey. So we've created all these different types of fake lures, fake non-natural bait to mimic natural bait. For some people, it's the challenge. For some people, it's fun. For some people, it's like, man, I didn't know I could just catch a bluegill, hook it behind the tail or hook it behind the dorsal fin and toss it out. And I'm catching 4, 5, 6, 7 pound bass on a live bluegill. And it's fun, man. When they grab that, you can throw them down. You can put a big bobber up on the top to hold them up. I like to just throw them out without weight. Just let them swim into that cover and just wait for that line to get tight and then hammer down that hook. But at the end of the day, largemouth bass are bluegill and crawfish. They will go after shad, especially as they're pushing back in for the spawn, because that's, those shad are coming in that warmer water, windy days. It's an easy prey base. They can go up, get a whole heaping handful of shad, but bass relate to cover and structure. So they're pretty much a stationary fish. They're an ambush predator, whereas schooling fish like white bass, like hybrid bass, like striped bass, walleye, they want to be out in that open water, and they work as a team to go after those bait fish. Bass do that for a few weeks out of the entire year. You may get a little of it in the summer. You may get a loose school that'll move out onto a shallow flat and they'll be shad. But a bass's favorite meal is a bluegill. So all of your colorations, your size profiles, at the end of the day, mimicking a bluegill for black bass fishing, largemouth bass, that is your go-to. That is your go-to pattern no matter where you go. They are always looking for a bluegill to eat. So if you put something in front of a bass, if it's bluegill and you're matching closely to what that bluegill looks like in that body of water, you're going to have success doing that. Would you recommend small crappie swim baits for this type of year? Yeah. I'm a huge advocate of fish smaller. Bigger profile baits, all they're doing is eliminating small fish. That's it. That's all it's doing. All these fish are going to eat what they can fit in their mouth. So if you're throwing like a big swim bait, these are big swim baits. These are 1.5 ounce jig heads. These are 6 inch. You can run this thing down along a dam. You might find a 10 pounder. You might find an 8 pounder, but you're not going to catch any 3 pounders on this. That bass has got to come up so far over that hook point. So this is just going to catch big fish. Some people like to do that. I mean, if you're just looking for that one trophy fish when you're out on the lake, you could slow retrieve this thing or troll it behind your boat. If you're on the bank, cast out. This is eventually going to pick up a really big fish, but you're going to eliminate everything else. So when you're talking about like a small crappie swim bait, yeah, I love them. I pick up a lot of bass when I'm crappie fishing on 32nd ounce, Bobby Garland's, that's it. But I really, really like a small tube. So this is a 1/32 ounce, 1.5 inch squirm and squirt tube. This coloration, this take on a green pumpkin. So you see green pumpkin, like this is considered green pumpkin. This is considered green or labeled as green pumpkin. Trying to find out. This is labeled as green pumpkin. There's watermelon and red. There's green pumpkin red. This color right here, this is a Bass Pro brand, that Crappie Max, Squirm and Squirt. This color that they call green pumpkin with this red and black, I use this everywhere. Ponds, creeks, rivers, big reservoirs. This coloration in tubes, and I got them in all sizes. Here's a 2-inch on a 16th ounce. Here is a 2 1/4 on a 16th ounce. You could even go up to an 1/8 ounce on this. And then here is a 1/4 ounce on a 3-inch. Tubes are not fished a lot. They're certainly not fished a lot for largemouth bass. People think of tube fishing, smallmouth bass, creeks and streams. Lakes that see a lot of pressure, ponds that see a ton of pressure, you can pick up 4 or 5 pound bass on that little thing. Now, granted, you have to throw it on a microlight. So you hook into I found that on my microlight rod with 4-pound test, I have trouble anything over 3 pounds. I can hold on to a 3-pound fish with my drag set pretty easily with this. I start getting to 4 and 5. It's the time of year where they're running real hard. The bites that I've been getting in the last 10 days, 14 days are really starting to pick up as far as just a predatory chase and bite, as opposed to a reactionary strike or a lull strike where the fish is hooked, the water's cold. You're kind of just pulling in a 5-pound fish. They might give you one run and then it's laying up. They're past that. So using small stuff like this, these are great for 3 pounds and under, but at this time of year, anything over 4 is going to give you a run for your money. But you will catch everything on this. You're going to catch big bluegill, small bluegill, big red ear, small crappie, big crappie, small bass, big bass, but you're not eliminating anything. So I'm a huge advocate. That's how I fish. I always small presentations. If we're talking like soft plastics, here is a kind of a medium size stick worm. Here's more of a bigger profile stick worm. I'll fish that all day long. Like you're going to pick up more fish, and this doesn't eliminate big bites. It's just putting it in front of fish. And especially during this time of year where in the winter, in the pre-spawn period, the real pre-spawn period, late winter, I definitely recommend go with a big profile bait, working something like this, 9, 10-inch, trick worms, big jigs, big swim baits fished real slow, erratically with kind of a flutter. Those bass, when they're coming out of that winter lull, they're just looking to pick up 1 or 2 real hearty, calorie-rich meals a day without expending any energy. They're now coming out of that. So now they're pretty much just eating what's in front of them. So small baits, big baits, you're just looking for a reactionary bite as we get into the spawn. Now, once we get into the spawn, I'll cover that. When we're actually dropping eggs, males on the beds, we'll talk about how you go after them. We're not there yet, just in the state. So covering some of these just as you guys go out and fish this weekend, into next week, you're still going to be in the best part of the pre-spawn. They've gotten away from just wanting that one big bait that's real slow to now they're chasing live bait. So if you want to throw out a live bluegill, a live shiner, even a live crappie, if you're in a pond and there's a lot of like stunted crappie, flip a crappie out there. And it doesn't take much, just a little octopus hook like that. Hook it, you have your bluegill or whatever. Here's its dorsal fin and tail. You're just hooking it just right there, just right through the back. That fish will take it. That line will get tight. You'll rip the hook right through the back of the bluegill or whatever you're throwing. It'll swim off, and then you're hooked into a pretty decent fish most of the time. So let's see what else. What would be better? Small swim baits in the main lake or channels, bays this time of year. Throwing small baits in deep water is difficult. So, part of you could throw a smaller profile bait on a bigger jig head. So, or, an internally weighted hook, something like this that's real. This is a little bit big. This is like a, 3-4-aught hook. But if you wanted to get like a 1-aught hook and put, something smaller on it, like one of these, just a little stick worm, something like that, you can get those. If you can get a small profile bait into deeper water, yeah, go for it. Like, always, you're going to catch more fish. There's still 1 and 2 pound, 3 pound fish out there. You're trying to catch that 4, 5, and 6 pounder, but this is going to catch them all. So, but when you're in a big reservoir, especially if you have wind and current, it's just really hard to get a 32nd ounce, 16th ounce down to where you want it, and then still be able to have connection with that bait where, you know, your line hasn't bowed far. So for these real small, anything under 1/8 of an ounce, stick to water 10 feet or less. But that pre-spawn period before they've dropped beds, if they're just building beds and they're uptight, then yeah, I would go with smaller bait profiles. You're going to pick up more fish. Here, like small pre-molded swim baits. This one's real small. This is like, you know, 2 1/4 inch, little bluegill, something like this. These are going to pick up a lot of those 1, 2, and 3 pound fish. You're not going to eliminate them out. You start getting into something like this, now you're looking at, yeah, probably over 2 pounds, but you're going to eliminate catching, you know, a lot of fish. And again, every time I go fishing, I may have a target species in mind, but I never want to eliminate bycatch. I love hooking into a big drum. I love hooking into a buffalo. I love hooking into a gar, crappie, sunfish if I'm bass fishing. So smaller profile baits, you're going to pick up more fish. You're not going to eliminate catching a big fish. But if you just want to catch a big fish, stick to big profile. And then it's going to be time consuming. You're going to have to be patient. You know, you might only pick up 2 or 3 fish the entire day. But when you do, using a big profile bait, you know, a big jig, swim jig or something, you know, bladed jig with a big trailer on it, your cap is going to be right around, you know, 2.5 pounds. You know, that mouth is just getting big enough to think I can go after that. And bass's eyes are always way bigger than their mouths are. I mean, I've thrown 10-inch bluegill out on a hook just to see what would happen. I've seen 4 and 5 pound bass think that they can get it, and all they can do is just hit the bottom of it and move it around. So small profile baits, definitely stick with that. If you ever used, I assume you're talking about one of the, is that the Roman mother swim bait? I think Japanese made. Those are, I mean, they're beautiful baits. Somebody took incredible time to handcraft. I assume that's what you're talking about when you're asking about $650 for I'm assuming that's a swim bait. That's the ones that I've seen that are $600 are, I think it's called the Roman Mother, and it's like a 10-inch, 12-inch swim bait, handcrafted, jointed body. Does it work any better? I don't know, but I wouldn't want to lose it. So I would stick with your good old fashioned. You want something that mimics one of those really expensive swim baits? Magic shad, Yamamoto jointed shad. You know, this is expensive to me. I mean, I think Yamamoto, a pack of these 4 or 5 is like $8. It's a lot, but these jointed swim baits, that's essentially all they're doing. You know, they build these big swim baits and they're just trying to replicate that swimming motion, big, lazy fish. You're not trying to rip this in real fast. You just want it. We've kind of gotten into the soft plastic now. So now we'll just start talking about rigging and techniques. Because they're, like I said, the reason that all of these things exist is because they all work in one way or another. At the end of the day, if you just want to go catch a ton of fish, live bait, live minnows, live bluegill, you can never beat natural bait. You're always going to catch your biggest fish. You're going to get the most action. It's what they're looking for. But so what we're trying to do is just mimic those prey species. So there's 1,000 different ways to rig every single one of these. What I prefer, especially with the jointed swim bait, offset hook, go right in through the nose, work it out the belly, you know, maybe 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch. So it's like that. Work it up the hook shank. It'll turn because you came out the belly. Hook point goes back in through the belly. And I like them weedless. I like these offset hooks. This one's a little soft. It doesn't want to play nicely. Grab another one. That one's a little soft. But run them through. I fish them weightless in ponds. Now you can throw, the only thing I'd say is, maybe throw a bullet weight, like, something like this over the top of it. But these are great. In farm ponds, for sure, small bodies of water, I'll fish these weightless that kind of last week at the pre-spawn when they're just really looking for one more big meal. And I'll fish it weedless, so it'll pop up like that. You could leave the hook point exposed if you wanted, like that. It's exposed. I just pinch it like if you just pull the plastic up just a little bit and then just kind of pop it over that hook point, it beds in. So now I can work this through any type of vegetation, anything like that. But this, I'll just cast this out right around the edges of weed lines, any type of point that kind of falls out into, where their spawning area is going to be. I cast that straight out. I just let it fall. Let it fall. Wait till I get slack. I'm on the bottom. Most of the time, if you're on fish, this thing just going down, that's where your first bite most of the time is on the fall when you cast it. I'll work it, twice. Give it one good rod pop. That thing will be down here. It's weightless. So that line jerks, it pops way up, and then it just kind of, this in the current, this stands straight, and it just kind of flutters back down. Something like this. Now you can get something where you have like a weight on the bottom, internally weighted hook. You can work these. They have those. If you ever buy a bait, they have, this on the bottom, that little slit. That's for an offset hook, but you can, put these weighted hooks, internally weighted. That's what I'd recommend. I wouldn't fish these with a jig head. I don't really like a jig head fall with a bass unless you're Texas rigging something and you're just trying to pitch into thick cover where you want it to just shoot straight down. I like the weight. I either want it weightless or I want the weight right here in the middle. That way, when it falls, it's not nose diving down. It's more of, dying fish, just kind of fluttering. So something to think about. But I jointed swim baits, this color I would use more for like striped bass, white bass, things like that. I'd stick with more natural colorations for your largemouth, things in green pumpkin, things in just straight gizzard shad. Here's another one. This one doesn't have a paddle tail on it. It's got the little fork tail. Or something like this. This could be a gizzard. This could be a bluegill. It's got that purple sheen through it. Again, just your local prey base, wherever you catch fish at. Take a look at them. Like I said, I catch a lot of bluegill where, man, when you turn them in the sunlight, they're just kind of that yellow and they don't really look like they have much to them. They have that iridescent through them. So things that have this kind of iridescent flash, you'd be shocked at, the bites you pick up just having that little bit of purple in there. But if I'm not using that, if purple isn't going to kind of be the sheen that I have, then I'm sticking with green pumpkins with red and black in them if I'm not just going straight shad imitation. But that's a decent one to do. Do Florida strain get active later in the year? Yeah, I mean, they're definitely their temperature sensitivity is going to be much more than those northerns. So in areas where you have crosses, so you have northern strain bass that are naturally in there, then you're going to have your purebred Floridas in there, and then you're going to have over years of them living in the same body of water, you're going to get those F1s naturally, and then you may even have some F1s that inadvertently, are getting stocked out of those ponds, or out of the hatcheries. But yeah, anything that is a first generation hybrid or a pure Florida strain, those fish are going to be geared towards later in the year, as far as what they're going to do. Now, our Floridas are mostly I-40 South. So they're really not going to be that far behind. When we're in central Oklahoma, northern Oklahoma, northwestern Oklahoma, we're susceptible to those north wind days, those cold fronts that come in. Whereas, they might get all the way down close to McAllister, and then those systems kind of push out to the east. So that pocket of Oklahoma that's, south of McAllister down to the Red River, pretty much all the way over to the, Ardmore area, that whole little pocket that's in there, your Floridas are active now. It's cold, but they're going to be a little bit behind the northern bass. Now, the Floridas that we have stocked north of I-40, like Uchi, lakes like that, you really just got to spend time on the water as an angler to see when those bass really start to get active. But genetically, those Florida strains are water temperature tolerant above 50. But they're spawning, as far as when they're going to look to spawn, they're still looking for the same water temperatures. So you're just more likely to pick up bigger northern strain bass earlier in the year than you would a Florida. They're just going to be less likely to grab that bait. But once we get into the, normal pre-spawn and spawning, that water temperature is 60 degrees and above, you're not going to see much of a difference. So that would really, Floridas are really only going to affect you in the winter times. You're just going to be less likely to pick up those bigger fish in water temps that are below 50 degrees, whereas you might be able to pick off a few really nice northern strain bass in water temps below 55 degrees. So that's really, but once where we're at now, right now, we're in it. This weekend is going to be the kickoff of real good bass fishing statewide. You're going to see crappie. The crappie bite's going to be really good this weekend. It's going to be really good all into next week. And then depending on where you're at water temperature wise, we're going to get those lows all over 50 degrees. Those black crappie are looking for 52 degrees to go. Those white crappie are looking for 56 degrees to go. Most of the bodies of water south of, north central Oklahoma. So not all the way up and not all the way to I-40, but midway down south, you're looking at water temperatures stabilizing 56, 55, 58 degrees. That's go time for those crappie to move up, which means those bass are right behind them. So these next 2 weeks are going to be that peak pre-spawn activity for bass, for largemouth bass in particular. And then as those crappie move back out, you as a bass angler for the spawn, you're looking at water temperatures 62 to 65 degrees. Bass are going to be most active at that time. That's the temperature they're looking for to spawn. There are environmental and human variables that can interact with that can disrupt spawning activities, such as flooding, such as releasing water out of a dam, moving those water levels around when the water temperatures are in that zone. That can affect where those fish are at. But if water levels are stable, you're not climbing, you're not dropping, and they can sit like that for a week, and that range of temperatures falls 62 to 65, that's your spawn. That's when the majority of fish are going to go, it's time to go. Because they sense those things. You might get a big rain that comes in March, raises water levels way up. They might stay up. And you're thinking, okay, those bass are going to push up that extra 3-4 feet to the bank to spawn. They won't. They are going to spawn where they have good substrate to go in the water where they know that that's what the water level is. They're sensitive to those types of things. The one mistake I see bass anglers make, when water's high, people start fishing way too shallow. You need to fish in what the shallow water was when the water was at normal pool. So if it's up 3-4 feet and there's all these bushes and shrubs and grass and it's up over the rocks and it's like, man, this looks great. All this cover, all this, you might get that in the summer. If you get a big summer rain, then fish might push up into that. But this time of year, those fish know I have to spawn here. If I spawn up here, I can sense that water level is dropping, because the water is only as high as it is on that peak moment that it's to that level. From that time, it's dropping. Now, to us as anglers, that might be that much every couple of hours. To the fish, they can feel that. They're like, no, that water's dropping. No, I'm going to spawn here. So something to keep in mind. We haven't had a big rain yet this year, not at least like that during the spawn, but over the course of the past 5 or 6 years, we have had lots of intense rainfall right during the peak spawning periods of crappie, black bass, sunfish to some extent. And that's what you want for species like white bass, walleye, crappie, that may move up inflowing water, paddlefish. They want the inflowing water. These fish that live in these reservoirs that have grown accustomed to, I'm no longer a riverine fish, I live in the lake, they are super sensitive to those water level changes. So before the spawn, into the spawn, if water levels are above normal on a body of water that you are at, target where you'd be in, normally you'd be in 2 foot of water. Now you're in 4 foot of water, 6 foot of water. That's your zone. That's where your spawn zone is going to be along those areas. So that's just a quick kind of off the beaten path thing that I see it every year. I watch it. I see the people that just want to put their boats, they get on the bank, they want to fish those. Those are great in June and July. Then fish, yeah, they definitely want to get up in there, especially you get that cold water comes down, water temperatures are in the high 70s. Those fish will move up for a brief period of time to eat, to catch some of that nice cooler water that's, the runoff that comes in. But this time of year, you get high water, stick to where the original water line's at. That's where your fish are going to be at. So let's talk about, we got some jigs here. So here's bladed jigs, often called chatterbaits because this one in particular is a chatterbait. Z-Man that's their brand name, but it's a bladed jig. I love bladed jigs. Bladed jigs are one of my favorite bass baits. They are so versatile. I can throw this into heavy cover. I can let it fall. I can get a bite on the fall. I can let it go all the way down. And then I can work it along the bottom if I'm trying to mimic, crawfish patternation. If I want to just swim it through, then I got my bait fish, my bluegill. These things are old. If you don't have a bladed jig in your box, definitely worth the investment. Learn how to fish a bladed jig. Super simple. You can literally just cast it out and just slow retrieve it in. And this blade right here just kind of pulses. It just gives you that little bit extra. A normal bass jig might have some, balls or beads in it that on the head, it's a little shaky and it makes some noise. But a bladed jig, you can cover as much water as you would with a swim bait, but you can also keep these lower in the water column if you want to. You can bounce them along the bottom. You can pick up. I feel with swim baits, you need to keep a swim bait moving, unless you're using something like a jointed plastic where you want it to fall. You don't want to just swim it in. You're looking to get kind of that flutter, bite, reactionary, or dying fish. But when you're fishing a pre-molded swim bait, when you're fishing your Alabama rig, you want to keep it moving. You're just slow and steady, just keep it going. Same thing. Crankbaits. Yeah, you can pause them and they get that little bit of action, but ultimately the end game is this thing is shaking, doing this the whole time. You get that out of this, but when you pause this, you get all sorts of action in that quick pause. You get that quick dive, your trailer comes up, your skirt swings, like you just get a lot of action out of this bait. So I love bladed jigs. Classic colors, black and blue, green pumpkin. And then you have kind of, you go with the chartreuse and white. If you're in some stained water, if you're, if maybe people are just throwing crankbaits, fish are looking to eat shad, this is just a different presentation that just that vibration, that sonic signature that's giving off in the water as it's making noise. Sometimes it's as easy as that. Not a lot of a difference to a fish in these two when they're going through the water, but how they're giving off those vibrations. Lots of people throw crankbaits. Lots of people throw lipless crankbaits. Not as many people are out there throwing a bladed jig consistently. So on pressured water, these types of baits can just be enough to get a reaction out of a fish. You know, you throw this anywhere in Oklahoma, every fish has seen this same lure 10,000 times. Doesn't mean they're not going to bite it, but on those days where they're just not quite ready to go grab it, you know, something that's got that smaller, people who fish in ponds, creeks, downsize like a 3/8 or a 1/4 ounce. For your bigger water, 1/2 ounce, 3/4 ounce. But these work great. Creeks and rivers, again, I love this coloration. Just that every brand is different. I just look for something all the time that kind of has that red through it. The backlighting from my window right here, it's kind of making this look a lot darker than it is, but you can see those streaks of orange and red through there. These are must-haves for anybody who's looking to pick up a real big bass. These are going to pick up your farm pond bass real good. Same thing with these, you know, jointed swim baits. Those are going to pick up big fish if you're not using live bait to begin with. And then if you're just throwing jigs, again, black and blue, green pumpkin and red, maybe, you know, some blacks and browns with some chartreuse through them, something like this. Any type of trailer that you want. You don't have to throw a trailer on them. You can get bit with just the skirt on there. But if you want to throw an offering with them, you know, something like this. So that's kind of like a big tadpole, but this in the right light, which is hard to see on my computer here, this really does a great job of mimicking a bluegill. This is a really awesome one. This is I don't know what the name of it is, but this is just a Jean LaRue. Sure, it's called like a paddle frog or something like that, but real good one. You know, your classic craw, throw off the back, something that's just pretty natural color. Like I said, try to keep it as natural as often as possible. Will you get bit on chartreuses, bright colors, you know, a down south Texas, Oklahoma special, bright red worm? Yeah, you're going to get bit. No questions asked. But I am quantity over quality. I want quantity with the opportunity for quality, but I'll take quantity any day of the week. I don't want to go to the water and spend all day and catch 30 fish. So I'm going to keep I want to catch as many fish. That's why I'm a big advocate, downsize. I just want to be catching fish. I just love catching fish. So I want to catch as many as possible. So natural colors, your green pumpkins, watermelon to some extent, blacks and blues. Those are always going to consistently get bit. And then, you know, your brush hogs. Brush hogs are always a staple. Again, this is a really good, that little bit of purple and green that's in that. It's really good for bluegill patternation. Little green. This is a green pumpkin. Again, it's kind of a little bit darker than I would like, but it's got that red and black through it, which just seems to just be the hot ticket in Oklahoma the majority of the time. And then your June bugs, you know, again, getting into kind of that bluegill, especially if you're in clearer water, those bluegill, long ear especially, you know, get that real bright coloration. So things like this, these are all great trailers. You can also fish them on, you know, just a straight jig head like this. You could work that. Again, I would, if I'm going to fish something on like an 1/8 ounce jig head or a 1/4 ounce jig head, I like that in creeks and rivers. I want flowing water to be able to bounce it. If I'm in still water, I want something heavier. Even in ponds, I want to feel everything on the bottom. I want to feel that cover. So I want my line to be really tight to my rod tip. So still water, even in a small pond, I'm going to favor closer to like a 3/8 or a 1/4. And then when I get into creeks and rivers for bass, then I'm looking at like an 1/8 ounce. Because this I can swim, but I can also let it fall, get down to the bottom and jig it up. And then again, every single one of these plastics that I just showed you, you do the same thing that we did with that little jointed swim bait. Take an offset hook. This is probably a little bit too big. These are 5/0 hooks. But again, with bass, they got the big mouth on them, like big, thick wire hooks. That's another thing I'll talk about in a second about what you're throwing them on. But you just run them up just like that. Make it weedless. You can put it like that. Again, if you're in a pond, when I'm on ponds, especially if I'm fishing in water less than 10 feet, I go weightless all the time. It's going to take a while. Your sink rate's going to be fairly slow, but that's what I'm going for. Just barely touching the rod tip. Every now and then give it a big pop, let it fall, and then just kind of very slow, just popping the rod tip very subtly, just like this, with just as slow as I can go. And that's what I'm going to do in shallow water. So small impoundment, city lakes, farm ponds, neighborhood ponds. I almost never use weight unless I'm using a bladed jig. And the weight is just the lure itself. But if I'm putting on a soft plastic, if it's not a trailer for a bladed jig, then I'm just going straight offset hook, weedless. I can pull this through anything. Again, most of your bites come on the fall. So pick your spots, make a good cast, let it go down. If it doesn't get bit that first time, couple of pops, let it fall, maybe one big pop, let it fall back down through the water column, and then I'm reeling it in. I don't work it all the way back into the bank. Again, those fish just have way too much time to look at it, and they have that instinct that when things are fluttering and falling around them, it's just DNA. They're just reactionary bite. They want to go for it. But you could throw on a bullet weight. If you want to Texas rig it and drag that thing along the bottom, also effective. That's just not my style of fishing. When I'm on smaller water, I'll do that if I'm on a bigger piece of water and I want to just pitch it into some heavy cover. And all I'm doing with that Texas rig with this bullet weight, the only thing this bullet weight's here for is to drag me down into the cover. That's it. After that, I'm just waiting to get bit on the fall. I might pop it twice and then I'm reeling it back in. So that's really all I'm using the weight for, is just to get down to where I want to be, as opposed to using the weight to keep me at a distance or at a depth to bring it back in. Carter Lake in Marshall County, still near the top of the bass surveys. I don't have an answer for that. I haven't seen. If you want a Marshall County is going to be south central region. If you type in here, I'll get our number here in a second. I'll give you the number to that office down there, our ODWC office. They're the ones who do the surveys on it. They'd be able to tell you, but that's going to be our south central region. A big thing with hooks, remind me, Will Green, if I don't answer that before the end, I'll put that number in there to give you the person that you can get a hold of. Hooks, bass fishing, right? You got lots of different line. You got monofilament, fluoro, braided line, any combination of the two. If you are pitching heavy cover with straight braided line, you're tying directly onto your braid. You don't have any fluoro or mono leader. Here's two 5/0 hooks. The one right here is a thin wire hook. This one is a thick wire hook. I believe this is either an Eagle Trocar hook. This is probably a Gamakatsu. Gamakatsu, almost all of their hooks are fine wire. But Mustad, Owner, Eagle Claws, Trocar hooks, thick wire with braid. You have no give on braid. I see it all the time. You're going to hook up, you put this little thin wire on there, right? You pitch it into heavy cover, bass comes and hits it. All you have is the braid. It's in all of those branches and the laydown and vegetation. You have to come through all of that. So you've got 50-pound braid on, 30-pound braid on, 65-pound braid on. You're tied directly onto this. You go to hammer down that hook, you will straighten that hook out before you know it. If you are tying directly onto braid, make sure you are using thick wired hooks. You can feel the difference immediately. You can typically see the difference, when you're looking at them in a package, but this is what you're looking for. Most of Gamakatsu's hooks are that fine wire. They work great. And it's not that you can't put them on braided line. It's just, if you're flipping and pitching heavy cover, thick wire hook, or you are going to run into problems. You're either going to straighten out the hook. You're not going to be able to hold on to the fish. I my personal preference, because I'm not a tournament angler, I'm not getting paid to put the fish in the live well to get paid. I tie on a fluorocarbon leader to all my braid. That way, because when you're bass fishing, especially when you're flipping and pitching cover, this is the time of year where you're going to get some fish up, into that thick stuff, especially along the banks and things like that. If they're taking a break, females that may have spawned that moved out just a little bit to a transition area, heavy cover, you want to throw your lure, your bait offering into just what a normal angler would say, that's just a nightmare, right? You want to throw where you're like, I'm going to get stuck, because that's what, and you make the setup for that. That's why your bullet weights, fishing with a weedless hook, making sure you maintain contact with that bait. You can get it out, especially if your hook point's not showing. Just very slow, very methodical. If the fish doesn't hit it on the fall, you're slowly kind of bouncing it out of that cover. And then once I'm clear of the cover, I'm not working it. I'm just ripping it right back in. But I will put on a fluorocarbon leader because that theory is not fail safe. Sometimes the line gets wrapped around a branch. Sometimes you just maybe a fish hits it and you go to set the hook and you rip the hook right into something. That fluorocarbon leader, monofilament leader, now I can pop my hook at the knot. If you get snagged into something with 50-pound braid, you're not getting it back. You can clamp down that drag. You can pull that brush pile out if you want. That puts strain on your reel. It puts unnecessary strain on your rod tips, your rod deck, your line. It's just not a good deal for keeping your equipment in good shape for the long haul. So if you're not a tournament angler, if you are not like, I have to get the fish in the boat when I hook it, that fluorocarbon leader is not going to, you're not tying on that much, couple of feet at the most. But that's going to go a long ways, especially if any of you fish ponds, small city lakes. That's just a courtesy to others. Put on a leader, because when you get snagged on that brush pile, on that lay down, you have to cut your line. You're not getting it back. So what ends up happening is you get all this braided line that's in the water, that's floating 20, 30, 40 feet off of these logs and laydowns. And it's just unnecessary if you are not a tournament angler. I completely understand. If you were a fishing guide, if you're, a professional angler, a semi-professional angler, you're getting paid to do it. You're betting your livelihood on putting fish in the boat. Completely understand it. If you're not that, there's really no good reason not to tie on a leader. It's going to save your gear, and it's going to help keep the bodies of water clean. It's going to help keep stuff out of the water. I hate going to my favorite local bass ponds, and I'll pitch something out there, and I'll think, I'll do this. I'm stuck in somebody's braided line that's just floated out there. And there's just not a lot of stuff you can do there. I get out in my kayak all the time, and I pull lure. I follow the line around, and I either cut it if I can't pop the hook off, but that's just something to be aware of. Braided line, no stretch whatsoever. Fluorocarbon, little bit of stretch, nothing like mono. So it makes for a great leader. You still have if you're just hooked up to your braided line because you're thinking, I just want the sensitivity, I want to be able to feel everything, a short fluorocarbon leader is not going to take away that, touch and feel that you have connected to that bait. But it'll go a long ways to protecting your equipment long-term and helping keep our bodies of water and the places that you like to go cleaned up. So you ever see somebody who's fishing around one of your local fishing hole ponds or whatever, and they're using braided line, 50-pound test, and they're snagging up in trees and down in the water and cutting their line? Give them a helpful little tip. Keep a spool. Just keep a spool of fluorocarbon in your bag at all times. You just buy one spool. This is going to last you years, because you're just taking little 2-foot strips off of a 150-yard spool, and it'll save equipment, and you get all the feel that you need. So that's just something. I've just seen it with people talking about hooks. They're like, oh, it's the hook. It's the hook. Well, no, it's not the hook. The hook is designed to do a very particular thing. And some of them are not meant to be tied directly onto braided line, especially heavy braided line, because you have no stretch and not very hard to straighten, especially these big offset hooks like this. So just something to think about. And then kind of the last of our baits that we have for the plastics are, I showed the stick worms, but just your very old school. These were the original fish catchers back in the, 70s and 80s before we got to where we're at now with there's a plastic for everything in every color. These work just as good as anything else. All you're trying to do is just put it in there. So hooking this on either just like a straight shank worm hook, you can go weedless with this. These work good for worms. Something like this is fine. It's going to be a little bit bulkier. This is just a little bit more low profile. And you do it the same way. Just run it through the top. Always pull it out the bottom side. And then as you work it up, it's going to turn over. So the bottom side is now on the hook point side. And then you just bring the hook point up. And like I said, you can either run it right along the back where it sits, or you can just pull it down a little bit and let it, and the hook point will go right into the plastic. That fish comes and hits it. It immediately knocks it down. You hammer down the hook. But that's just completely dealer's choice, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever as an angler. But a couple other hook offerings, shaky head football jig. So this just kind of gives your offset hook lots of mobility. So if you're using, soft plastics that have a lot of buoyancy to them, a trick worm or something like this, you basically are just banging this along the bottom. And it allows the hook in the current and the wind to free spool, just like this. So your worm, instead of it always being on a fixed point, it allows it as you move it to kind of have more of a natural pulsating action to it. So football head jig heads attached to just an offset hook like this. If you're the type of person who likes to pitch heavy cover, work big grass lines, things like that, these are great because you can just keep them right along the bottom, pop it up, and just keep hopping it along those grass lines. And it allows that hook to just come, just like a barrel swivel, just move and move. It just gives that bait just a little extra action that you wouldn't get if you did it on just a straight offset hook, either Texas rigged or Carolina rigged. Anybody who's unfamiliar with the Carolina rig is kind of like a Lindy rig. So you're bottom fishing. Same thing with Texas rig. What you're trying to do is you're running your bait along the bottom. But with the Texas rig, your weight is on the hook, right? So when you're moving it, when it's dropping, this is out in front of it, but the line eventually catches back up. So most of the time when you're working your Texas rigged, whatever, worm, lizard, stick worm, any type of plastic, this is it the whole time. So you don't really have a whole lot, other than just the line that can move it around. So this is what you're doing. Now with the Carolina rig, your main line is attached right here on the top, and your leader line, however long you want to make it, typically anywhere from 1 to 2 feet, your line's back behind it. Now that can be attached to any different type of hook. It could be an offset hook. It could be a little worm hook. It could be a little jig head. You're just pulling that bait down right on the bottom, essentially. So Carolina rigging in like thick, heavy grass cover, Carolina rigged for a reason, Texas rigged for a reason. They got their names in the states where they were popularized. The deep South, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, lots and lots of grass cover, tons of grass mats. Oklahoma, hard bottom, especially on the eastern half of the state, or soft bottom prairie with, thick cover. So we're looking for things more where we can just pitch it into those brush piles, as opposed to pulling it through long grass mats and things like that. And that's, the Carolina rig. If anybody walleye fishes knows what a Lindy rig is. A Lindy rig is just pre-rigged with the line. So you just have a little bait holding hook out about 2 feet behind where the swivel is at with a little non-snag weight. Same thing here. You're just dragging this along the bottom, however long your leader is. You're working your worm, your swim bait, whatever, and you're just keeping it moving at the bottom of the water column and pushing it through. So those are our different types of finesse packages: Carolina rig, Texas rig, weightless, soft, football head shaky jig, depending on how heavy and how fast you're fishing it. Your power lures are your, a jig can be a finesse lure depending on how you're working it. But if you're just working a swim jig or a bladed jig, it's essentially a power lure. Your constant contact, no slack, no nothing, maintaining contact, all your hard baits. And then the last setup that we have here is, of course, the ever increasingly popular drop shot. So you've got your weight, your hook attached to your line. These, most people think of drop shot fishing in the bass world, up north, smallmouth, running flats, working it through. They work great for largemouth. I love this type of presentation. I would consider myself a lot more of a finesse angler than a power angler. I like taking my time, working spots, things like that. I like fishing weightless a lot. I'm a huge fan of stick worms, either wacky rigged. So, a wacky rig would be like this, either with a piece of split shot or a bullet weight or weightless, let it fall, pulsate. I like them on an offset hook as well, weightless or with a bullet weight, just depending on what I'm throwing them into. Same deal, through the top, bring them up, weedless. But with the drop shot presentation, I like ripping these things through brush piles with, where'd my little one go? Just something like this. Just a little, this is Z-Man California Craw color, but it's that same coloration that I've talked about, the very kind of green pumpkin, but the red and black flake in that darker base of a green or olive. And all I'm doing with this is with the drop shot, you're just hooking on the underbelly and then you come right through the nose. Then it sits on there like that, goes down. I prefer drop shot hooks that have a little bit of a kink at the eyelid. You can see it right there where it kind of sits down. It's kinked right there. My hook point is parallel with my eye hole. It's not facing back at it. So it's nice and wide gap. So when this is working along the bottom and a fish hits it, when you're setting the hook, that hook point is coming right where you want to hook a fish. So anytime you hook a fish, the ideal place is right here, right on the top, either the roof of the mouth or right in the middle of the top lip. That is where you have the most control of the fish. You are in complete control. You get them in the side of the mouth, you get them back down on the bottom on the tongue patch. That's where you can run into problems with losing fish. Typically, if you hook a fish directly in the roof of the mouth or right in the front, unless something happens where they break you off, they're very unlikely to throw the hook. You just, as long as you have tension, you're good the whole time. But that's kind of, this is, drop shots are becoming increasingly popular, especially on bass fishing, shows and bass fishing tours, because this is what is really effective for smallmouth when in big water up north. Those fish sit out along those grass flats, those rocky, rock pile boulder fields that are out. And it's just really easy to drop this down and just, it's just the very slow presentation that you want, which again, huge advocate, fish with smaller profile baits. You can't fish slow enough. Those are just the things that we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to mimic the same prey species. So all these different techniques are all attempting to do the same thing. It's just, what are you as an angler most comfortable doing? What do you like doing the most? What kind of bite do you like getting? Some people love that crankbait bite. You're ripping it in and it just, it hammers it. There's no mistake. If you're drop shotting or, weightless presentations, you don't feel the bite almost ever. You might get a little tick on the line where it's like, what was that? But it's not a bam, bam, bam or a hammer. Most of the time, you're just watching your line. So it's not really much of a bite. You're just sitting there. You have slack in your line. You typically fishing with the spinning reel. And all you're doing is watching your line. Did my line go from being kind of taut to now it's really loose? Or was it kind of loose and now it's starting to get tight and go? That's all you're looking for your indication to set the hook. So that different anglers, different strokes, different folks, what do you love to do for fishing? I want to provide you guys with as much information as possible so that, because all this stuff works. You can take anything we've just done, take it to any lake, any pond, any river. Everything we've shown will catch fish. in certain areas, some of these presentations are going to catch more fish. You're going to figure that out as the angler. But ultimately, what do you love to do as an angler? I love watching that line get tight. That's my favorite thing. I love just watching. Oh man, like, I don't feel it. It's just fun. It's a fun thing to watch. So that's what hopefully anybody who comes away from these classes, you get something like that. 70s and 80s, worms of any color work as long as it's grape color. Yeah. The good old purple worm, red worm, chartreuse worm. Any love for the fly guys? Yes, of course. I grew up fly fishing. I'm grew up in Seattle, Washington, spent first 20 years of my life without a spinning or bait casting reel in my hand. So any fly guys for bass, this is the time of year, man. Rip those streamers, little olive woolly buggers, work those in your ponds or creeks. A little bit tougher out on the bigger water, but during the spawn, if you're out on a boat, man, you can throw just about anything over those beds. So that's kind of what we're going to get into right now. We kind of covered our range of baits. So all of these things are going to work. They're all going to work in those areas of transition immediately adjacent to the spawning areas. This is a spawning bass course, like I said at the beginning. Anybody wants to watch any parts of the pre-spawn bass course that I did back in January, lots of good information goes into just as much detail with all these baits, exactly where to put them, how to put them. But I figured just for bass anglers, we'll just cover all of our bass gear, and this is, we've shown a lot. We've been on for an hour and a half, and we've gone through, just a handful of baits and every different brand, color, size. Like I said, my kind of tried and true advice for anybody: clay stained water, whites and reds, dingy water, little bit brighter colors, blacks and blues, some chartreuse mixed in there, lime green, maybe a watermelon with that kind of brighter green with red and black. Then when you get into clearer water, or if you're fishing small pressured water, so creeks and streams, farm ponds, neighborhood ponds, complete natural, doesn't matter what the color is of the water. Something like this, just sticking to those very basic natural shades of green pumpkin, maybe black and blue. If I'm fishing creeks, rivers, or ponds, I almost fish this exclusively. I almost don't even throw anything else because this just catches everything. So if I just want to walk around a pond and cast, this works. If I really want to get into a lunker bass, well, then I'll throw on a crappie nibble or a little worm or something like this and just catch me a little 4-6 inch bluegill. Tail hook him with a bait caster with 30-pound braid on it, hooked up to a fluorocarbon leader, and let him swim. That'll pick up big fish. But let's talk about the fish actually spawning. I'll just touch this right now. There's lots of debate in the fishing community on the ethics of fishing for fish while they're spawning. If you asked a fisheries biologist, should you mess with fish when they are actively engaged on their beds, they'd probably say no. Let the fish do their thing. As anglers, it's really just about respect for the sport, for the tradition, for the fish. If you're out there catching food, if you're going bass fishing to fill up your freezer, there's no better time than the spawn. My recommendation would be let the females go. You're going to catch a male fish off of every bed, and every single one of those male fish is going to be 1 to 2 pounds. And that's perfect eating size, perfect box fillet. Keep those 1 and 2 pound fish. Let those females go. Let them drop their eggs. Another male will move up. They'll spawn. They can do that. If you're targeting those females, just hold them with care when you get them to the boat. If you're using a net, make sure it's a rubber net. If you're pulling them out of the water, make sure you got a good grab on that lip. Don't grab them on the back. I see that all the time. I don't know where that started. Again, professional angling, they go and they scoop them on the side of the boat. If you're going to belly scoop them, that's one thing because you're getting your hand wet. But if you're grabbing that fish right when it's at the top and you're just grabbing it with your dry hand, you're taking that slime and natural bacteria off of them, which is what protects them. So anytime you're going to handle fish, especially during the spawn and you're throwing them back, get your hands wet, make sure you get a good grip on the bottom jaw. And then if it's a really big fish, I mean, anything over 5 pounds, get your bottom hand underneath it, take your photo. And if you're not keeping the fish, get it back into the water. Now, as far as targeting the bed itself, my recommendation or my personal philosophy is don't drag anything on the nest. You can fish above it. You can fish around it. Just don't drag your lure, through the net. You're going to get bit. Those fish are actively looking to protect that nest while they're up on it. So having said that, let's talk about the best way to target fish now that they're spawning. So the best fishing of the year for bass happens the week before the masses spawn. That is the most active bite. Fish are actively feeding. You can catch really big females. You're going to catch lots of males, but you're going to catch a lot of fish. Once they actually start to spawn, that overall bite is going to go down. You are just going to hit fish that are protecting. You're probably not going to catch the females once they've spawned. It's very difficult. You can catch them around the nest. That means they haven't dropped their eggs yet. The second they drop those eggs, they don't provide parental care. They dip back out. So trying to catch if you see a really big bass hanging around a bed, don't pitch to the bed because she's probably waiting for the male. She's looking like, all right, let me check out this bed. Is this good shape? Is this where I want to drop my eggs at? The male's done the work. They kind of do their song and dance. You can catch them off of those beds. You can catch them. You can especially catch the males after they've dropped and you're running them over the tops of those beds. There's not a whole lot of sophisticated fishing to this. I mean, personally, the easiest, best way to catch them when they are spawning, go with your lizards. Lizards on a Texas rig, run that right over the top of a bed. Cast right to the left side of it, right to the right side of it. If you can see the bed, work it all the way around the bed. Like I said, personal preference. I try not to mess with the actual bed itself. If you can avoid, especially like a Carolina rig or a Texas rig where you have that weight on the bottom, you're using a jig. If you're not just swimming something like a crankbait or a topwater, I don't like dragging something through that bed. So I try, I stay away from the Carolina rigs during the spawn. Texas rig works fine. I just don't let it go down to the bottom. I flip it, back over the top of the bed. And then I'm just kind of slowly bouncing this thing middle of the water column. But what they are looking for is something that is going to either try to eat the eggs while they're incubating or eat the fry once the fry hatch, because the males are going to provide a little bit of parental care once the fry hatch. Same thing with male crappie. They're going to do the same thing. The bite, again, is intrusion bite. It's not a feed bite. That's why I'm saying the week before the spawn is the best bite because they're actively feeding. So that spawning bite is you're going to catch male fish over and over and over and over again. They got that big mouth on them. They open up. They can usually get the hook point in. They're not trying to inhale the bait. So they're trying to defend it. So that's why things that look like they could cause problems for the eggs, for, the fry, anything like that, swim baits, again, great. Work them right over the top. Anything that they think might, go down their little, bluegill pattern. I would get away from the shad colorations. But, something like this, work this over on like a Ned head rig or Ned head jig. Just like that. You just put that in there and just slowly, it'll zigzag across. If you really want to stir up the bottom, right around the edges of those beds, Texas rigged, maybe a jig or something that you just kind of work in and around. But again, keep it to bluegill colorations, terrestrial colorations, lizards, snakes. So something like this, big, you can just throw this completely weightless, throw it right over the top of the bed, let it fall down, give it a couple of pops. Anything that they think is coming to eat those eggs or mess with the fry, that's what they're looking for. Something like a shad, they're not worried about that. That's not, to them, you might get a reactionary bite, but what they're ultimately looking for are bluegill and lizards and snakes, anything that may want to eat that type of forage of them, spawning. So that's what they're looking for. So this would, something like this, stick worms, little tube-like, again, keeping it in natural colorations, especially, when they're spawning, that, they're looking, maybe something like this. They could, just a worm, again, nothing overly fancy once they're spawning. They're looking to defend. It's really those few weeks before the spawn where everything else that we touched on is really going to help you get those active bites, the fish that they're just looking to gorge. They're looking to find those species. So, anything, and a rattle trap is probably a pretty good one to run over a bed. I don't use them because you're usually in so shallow water, and there's typically, they've cleared out weeds and debris and things like that, so you can get those trebles hung up. So I typically favor something more along the lines of an offset hook that's weedless, because I can just keep it moving, keep it through, try to get away from the trebles, because they're just going to get caught up into all that junk that's on the bottom. But if you are, something that's making a lot of noise, that's doing that, you're probably going to get bit. Again, something that looks more predatory. You can start getting away from the whites and the shad colorations, but something that looks like, oh, that's a fish that's going to come try to, get into my nest. It's going to get into the bed. But that kind of brings me to the end of what I have for spawning bass. Anybody have questions? Now it's kind of when we open it up for, if I didn't cover something, if you got questions about bodies of water, anything like that. Spawning bass, like I said, go watch the pre-spawn course, just because that really goes into the detail. I showed you all the lures today just because it's that time of year. All of these lures are going to be effective no matter where you go, because most people, you get that 1 or 2 weeks right before the spawn where it's just throw the kitchen sink at them and fish are just biting. I mean, you're picking them up on crankbaits and rattle traps and jigs and wacky worms. It just doesn't seem to matter for that 2 weeks when they're gorging. So something like, I don't think I brought this one up, something like that, just a swim in this. It's just that 2-3 weeks before the spawn is just so much fun for largemouth fishing, because you have that chance to really catch a giant. But you just get into fish. You kind of knock that dust off the rod, really get you excited about April and May and early June, because bass fishing, unlike crappie that can die off a little bit after the spawn, like you get that real good crappie bite for 3 weeks before the spawn. You get another week of the males heavily guarding, and then it kind of slows down. Those fish kind of retreat back out. They're a schooling fish. Same thing with white bass. You hit the white bass really hard for 2, 3, 4 weeks. And then they just kind of, they get back into the lake and they do their thing. And, people who target those specifically spend all year just chasing those fish. They can get on them. But just as an average angler going out, you have a little bit more difficulty catching those fish. Whereas with largemouth, you get this awesome 3-week window before they spawn. You get to catch those males, while they're spawning. They're super active. And then it doesn't take much longer after they're done spawning for the bite to really pick back up again. The odds of you getting into one of those really big females, 10+ pound fish, depending on what body of water you're in, for a farm pond, you're probably not going to catch those 6-pounders anymore. But you're going to catch tons and tons of 2s, 3s, 4s. On any body of water in the state after the spawn's over. Fishing for bass is just as good late April, all through May, early June. You really don't start to see a die down of really good bite for bass until you get into water temps that are into the 80s. And then we got catfishing, and then catfishing is great for 3, 4, 5 weeks. And then we just hit the dog days of summer. That's when I encourage people, take up bow fishing, go hit streams and rivers. Lots of bass fishing opportunities in the state. You're not targeting giants, but it's fun to catch 12 to 14-inch bass on the Illinois, Barren Fork, Mountain Fork, any of the little offshoot creeks on the eastern part of the state that have, either county access, ODWC access, GRDA access. That's, July and August, I focus all my time on rivers and streams. Those are the dog days of summer. It's hard to get in. And then September is a tough month. September is arguably the toughest month to fish, I think, in the state. And then October, November, pretty good again. And then December, January, we get good winter catfish, and then you're getting back into your big largemouth again. So largemouth bass, just depending on where you're targeting them, are pretty good for everybody. Middle of March, all the way through June, and then again, October, November. So you're looking at a fish that actively is going to bite almost all of the lures we've shown for 6 months a year. There's really not any other species in the state that you can just really do that with artificial lures. So having shown all this, again, targeting spawning bass. When we're talking about spawning bass, you're really talking about the week before the spawn, because that's what everybody remembers. Oh my God, fishing's so good during the spawn. It's actually not quite the spawn yet. It's that week before where they're just gorging. Then you just start picking up male bass over and over and over. You can catch the same fish 20 times. He'll just keep going right back. You throw something on it, he'll grab it again. He'll grab it again. He'll grab it again. I mean, you can literally exhaust the fish to death, which is why, again, heavily debated, and it's completely up to the angler, but catch a fish, move on. Catch a fish, move on. Catch a fish, move on, especially when they get up onto those beds. If you're not keeping them, quick, handle, take a picture if you want, put them back in the water, get them back to let them do their little cycle. Because unlike all the other species that I mentioned that do go through their spawning routine, that become very difficult to catch just with everything, gets a little bit more technical. Largemouth are not that way. That largemouth bite is just as good 3 weeks after the spawn. You're just finding them in a different place. They've moved back out a little bit, but they're actively feeding. And you can pitch and flip cover till your hands get bloody in May and June, and just pick up fish after fish after fish. Best largemouth lakes near Tulsa. Grand, obviously. If you're looking for, what's the name? I think it's called Veneta Lake now. It was Bull Lake. That one is maybe 45 minutes, 30 minutes east of Tulsa, 35 minutes. That's a good one. That's a very small body of water that has some pretty decent fish in it. The Arkansas is kind of a tough one. Keystone and Caw aren't, compared to all the other bass lakes that we have, Caw and Keystone on the Arkansas system aren't our greatest bass lakes. They do better with the temperate species, white bass, hybrid stripers, paddlefish, catfish. The saline content of the Arkansas and that prairie stream soft bottom is really more, conducive for your crappie and your paddlefish and your temperate bass. There are smallmouth and largemouth in Keystone. It's just not as prevalent. You have to target very key areas of the lake, the marinas, the rocky outcroppings, because, the bottom of that lake is fairly sandy and sediment filled from the Arkansas and the Cimarron dumping in. But lakes near Tulsa, like I said, Bull Lake, Grand, Hudson, Fort Gibson, those are all quality bass lakes. The Neosho is one of the most prevalent, bass fishing rivers in the country. It's on par with, like the Tennessee River system. That's in Oklahoma, that Neosho system from Grand, Fort Gibson, and Hudson. Those are three very, very quality 2 to 4 pound bass. Just lots of fish, lots of opportunities to catch lots of fish. There are the occasional good ones that are if you really want to get into those lunker fish, if you really just want to target a big fish, southeastern Oklahoma, Broken Bow, Cedar Lake, Lake of the Arbuckles, all of those little kind of not very publicized lakes around Duncan, Fuqua, Mountain Park, Clear Creek, all great opportunities to catch really big bass. But as you move up, past Eufaula and you get back out of the Arkansas into that Neosho system, that's where you get back into some really quality fishing. And then Keystone, or 10 Killer with the Illinois system, got great mixture of largemouth spots and smallmouth in there. So those are all really quality fisheries. But honestly, if you just want to go out and catch 4 and 5 pound bass, you're gonna have the best luck in neighborhood ponds, small city lakes, things that don't get a lot of pressure from a bass fishing perspective. There's tournaments on Grand and Hudson and Fort Gibson all the time. There's people who are out there bass fishing year round. Those fish see a lot of presentations. They see a lot of the same things over and over again. They're great lakes. You can get back in there during this time of year and you can catch and catch and catch. But it's just kind of up to what you are as an angler. How many fish do you want to catch? How big of a scale of fish do you want to catch? And Oklahoma has all of that to offer. All over the state, you just kind of have to pick your spots of what you're looking for. Do you want quality mixed with quantity? Do you just want quantity? Do you just want quality? You want something close to where you live? Do you just want to flip around a little worm all day? Do you want to fish crankbaits? All those different things. There's a lake or an access point that's tailored for that in Oklahoma if you can't get out on a boat. But as far as just going and catching sheer numbers and then catching some really nice fish, 3, 4, 5, maybe even a 6 pound fish, neighborhood ponds, close to home water, those city ponds, park ponds, they all, you might look at them and be like, man, there's not really much there. You would be shocked. Just going out and in those ponds, keep it simple. Little stick worms, wacky rigged or weightless. Don't get super loud. When you're fishing ponds, small impoundments, nice and quiet. Tubes, people don't, like I said, not many people throw tubes. So versatile. You can just slowly pop this in. This is how I like to fish it. I just keep twitching the rod tip, slowly reel, and all this is doing is just kind of pulsating in. I don't bang it along the bottom. I don't just straight rip it in. Just real slow retrieve, just very subtly popping the rod. I have caught, my personal best fish in Oklahoma for a bass is just a shade over 8 pounds. I've caught a couple 7s, a dozen 6s, and then 5 and under, I can't count. But almost all of those fish under the 5 and under, I caught them on these. Like this, I just caught them in ponds using this. Nothing fancy. Or I caught them on, little stick worms, yum dingers, Yamamoto Senkos, TRDs from Z-Man, but just in these types of colorations, either wacky rigged or straight offset, let them fall weightless. There's just, you can make fishing as complicated as possible. And when you get out on the bigger water, especially your big reservoirs, you have to work those points. You have to work, those funnel area, anywhere that's going to congregate fish. And then it is more advantageous for you to run crankbaits, lipless and lift, big rigs, big umbrella rigs, swim baits, stuff where you can cover a lot of water, swim jigs, bladed jigs. Those aren't, they're going to catch fish, but it's only because you're fishing big water trying to find fish concentrated in a certain area. So, when I think of bass fishing, I think of power fishing in reservoirs, and I think of finesse fishing in small water and creeks, just because the fish are more condensed in certain areas. They do get some pressure, and you want to be as natural and quiet as possible. That's what those fish are looking for. They don't want to get shell shocked. They don't want to see this come ripping by them when they're comfortable on their little log in a pond. They're more likely to watch this fall right above them and come get it. But I understand when you get on the big water, best of luck trying to finesse fish until you find them. You know what I mean? Like you can go sit on a point and be like, all right, wind's blowing this way. Fish are probably going to be right down this. This is where the wind's blowing. This is where shatter and bait fish are going to get pushed. I'm going to run crankbaits and spinner baits and, swim baits, Alabama. I'm going to keep running them until I figure out size and pattern. What color are they looking for? What size are they looking for? And then I'm going to use that on those same areas on the entire lake. But it takes a lot more practice, a lot more patience. it changes day to day. When you're bass fishing in small ponds, small bodies of water, it stays fairly consistent. You know what that bite's going to be. So that's kind of, I go to big water to catch catfish, hybrids, white bass, walleye, so things I can't catch in a pond. When I go bass fishing, for the most part, I go to creeks and rivers and I go to ponds, because that's where, that's the fun place to catch 2, 3, 4, 5 pound fish. But all of this should kind of cover that. But if you do have, you want to find out every body of water near Tulsa, call our Jinx office. So ODWC, just type in ODWC Jinx and call them. And Josh Johnston's the supervisor there. Eric Brennan's the fish tech. They both fish a lot of water right in and around Tulsa. They know, Josh especially knows a lot about bass fishing in that area. So that's who I would call. Yeah, long-nosed gar, they're probably starting to stage up. Gar kind of spawn later into the summer, but what else? Anybody else got any questions? I'm trying to think if there's anything that I didn't cover. Presentations. I mean, the popular one on the last few of these courses I've done has been the drop shot setup of actually showing people how to tie that. For drop shot just seems to be the trigger word today in the fishing community. Everybody's obsessed with learning how to drop shot. But like all of these deals, most baits, another thing to think about, how you rig a bait. So like I showed with these swim baits, this one right here, it looks like there's nothing much to it. You could run a jig head into it, pull the jig head out the back. But the ones that have these little sleeves underneath them where they're kind of hollow bodied, that's meant to hide either the offset or your internally weighted. But for things like these, it's a lot easier, instead of trying to hook it like we would with a normal offset and then pull this over this. You take things like this and you go up into that sleeve, and then you poke that through the nose right there, and then get that set. And then you pull that hook point back up through the middle of that hollow body, and then poke it right through the back like you would anything else with an offset. Some baits now, some plastic baits, which way's up, which side's right side up, right? Some of them look like, either way. Kind of a key indicator. So like on these ones, you see it's got this is just like, I love these little guys for drop shots. They float really well. They got the nice little tails, nice and easy. But this one, they got the ribs along the bottom where that causes that vibration, and the eyes are on the top. So that tells me that this bait is meant to be fished this way, not this way. That's not always the case. Some of them, like, you can't tell. I mean, obviously something like this doesn't really matter. A tube doesn't really matter. You can go around either side of it. But then like a bait like this, so not all of these stick worms, some of the stick worms like the Yamamoto's, they're solid all the way through. But like a Yum Dinger, they actually have that hook slot. It's kind of hard to see, but there's that hook slot that's right there, which is meant to have the hook point come out through that. That's kind of that little nesting place where I said you can either bury the hook point back into the plastic, but on something like this, it's meant to run and then kind of sit in that little cavity, which is just enough of a depression that if you don't set the hook and you're just working this through it, that hook point, so the hook point's right there. And when I work that on there, kind of just sits. If I worked it a little bit farther back, it would sit nicely in there, but it would hide it if you hook it perfectly where it's in line with the back. But again, that just gives you that little space, and now it's completely weedless. So those are other little things to look for on baits. I've noticed that with plastics in the last 5-10 years, as they've gotten more and more of different deals. Like, this one right here, it's got it on the top and it's got it on the bottom. So because it's a fork tail, you could actually fish this either side. Now, most fish species, Doesn't really matter. The coloration of the water is going to, the clearer the water, the more vibrant colors the fish are going to be, more light penetration. But for all fish, dark on the back, light on the belly. Why? When they get up near the surface and birds and predators, the dark back mimics the bottom, right? So, or the cover or the structure or anything that's down there. And the light underside kind of mimics that sky if you were underwater looking up. So typically with baits, always make sure that the lighter side is on the bottom of the presentation. So whether you're swimming it straight through the water column, working it with the jig up and down, whatever the direction you're moving it, that the top part of it is the darker coloration. And that's just a biological thing for them for protection. So all fish essentially have that. Even gizzard shad have kind of that dark line across the back. Threadfin have that blue line across the back. Even though they're mostly silver, they're mostly a flashy color. That flashiness, that's why they kind of hang up higher in the water column as it gets hotter. When those waves are flashing around and doing that, it breaks up the water and they're flashing and the light's hitting them. They get those big schools because to a predator fish, that looks like one big fish. So that's a defense mechanism for them. That shiny makes us look like one big thing as opposed to a bunch of little things. Whereas your solitary fish or even some of your schooling fish, they're going to have, your open water fish typically have more of that white coloration, your white bass, your hybrids, and then bottom fish like walleye and sockeye and sauger, very dark almost all the way onto the underbelly side. Why? They spend most of their time near the bottom, not a whole lot of need for a predator to be underneath them. Largemouth bass, they, depending on where they live, if they're in that clear water, they're going to have that real green through them, kind of almost black on the back. And then they have the really good white belly. On some of them, that white belly might start right below the lateral line. Some of them, that kind of green and black stripes might go down almost to the very bottom. You might only see a strip. That's just a byproduct of the water clarity. That changes, like I said, if you've ever fished in like a muddy pond or something like that, it was clear a week ago. 2 weeks later, we got huge rains. It's clay stained. You go and pull fish out of there and they're stark white. I mean, I've caught bass that you almost can't even tell that they were green. It's just, it immediately fades out like it's an albino. So that's just light penetration and things like that. But as an angler, like what I try to preach to people, understanding your prey base is so much more important than understanding the predator. Because understanding the predator is easy. They want to attack from behind and from below almost all of the time. So you want to know which direction are they oriented in the water, when they're holding on cover, when they're holding on structure. If they're out over a point, the wind blown side, they're going to be on the side where that bait's getting blown up over the top of them. So you always want to be casting into the wind, bringing it with the wind, because those fish are looking to come up right as it goes up over a hiding place. So a hiding place for, a bass on a point is just basically sitting on the bottom. They're just sitting. So if you have a ridge that goes down on the point, wherever that wind is throwing, bait and organisms over the top, they're just sitting on the bottom and they're looking up, and then whatever comes over, they just go for a quick grab. So those are little things that can go a long ways when you're on the water, of just understanding what that prey is, what they're doing, what they look like, because then the predator is easy to figure out. The predator's just trying to eat them. But understanding where the bait is and how the bait's moving and what the bait looks like, that's the biggest thing. And that's when you figure out those patterns. And that's really when you take angling, because there are certain times of the year where, like I said, you can just throw the kitchen sink out there for the next month and pretty much catch bass after bass after bass, crappie. And then when you get into May, same thing with bluegill. Anything that a bluegill can put in its mouth, just cast. It doesn't matter. But it's when we get outside of these 2-3 months of the year, if you're the type of person like me who wants to fish every single day, you have to start figuring out, okay, well, there's times a year where I know it's going to be tough, but it still doesn't discourage me from wanting to go out and try. And that's where you learn those little deals with bait and how those predators want to orient in the water and, where they're located in relationship. Will Green, the Durant hatchery, the Caddo office there, if it's in Marshall County, that will be that. Call them to talk about that lake. Small pond with largemouth. Any tips for first time fly rod setup? Yeah, I mean, streamers for sure. You know, little woolly buggers. Bass fishing is, to me, real fun on a fly rod when we start getting into top water. You know, if you can throw a real big popper or something like that. But as far as going after largemouth, like right now with a fly rod, you definitely stick to like clouser, like dark clouser minnows. So green back, you know, real olive back, brown back, maybe just a, you know, couple streaks of white, some flash through the middle, or just woolly buggers, and just strip those in. You know, the heavier the better. Try to make them erratic, but you know, an olive green woolly bugger is going to fish just like this in the water. It's going to look very similar. And so if you can get a woolly bugger that's green, that's got any type of like red or black through it like that, that's what I do for a fly rod right now. Once you get to May and June, start hitting top water and see if you can't get a big one to come up for a, you know, big bass popper. That's when it's really fun. Anybody got anything else? We've hit the 2 hour mark. So typically what we do is I can see everybody who's in here, or I'd see how many people are in. So essentially what I do is I have no new information. So I can sit here and answer questions for as long as it takes. So this will be uploaded onto our website. So the link that you got in the email to this presentation, there's the other link that takes you directly to the archive on our website that has all of these videos that we've played. You can also just back out of this and go and click on our Outdoor Oklahoma YouTube channel, and the Ask an Angler playlist is on there. So that's always there. But this will be up 5-10 minutes after the presentation's over. So if you don't want to stick around for any more questions, I just ask that hop off when you're done. And once the guest list gets down to 0, then I end the stream, and then it'll be live on our website in 5-10 minutes. If you want to check back and be like, oh, they had 10 more minutes of questions, you can just come back and watch those last 10 minutes. So yeah, with that, go ahead and ask questions. If not, if I don't see anybody hop off here in the next couple of minutes, but there's no more questions, I'll just end the stream. But it should be a good spring. I'm very excited. The next 15 days of weather statewide is it couldn't be timed better. You know, that winter storm that we had was inconvenient, you know, for all of us, but wasn't really that big of a deal for the fish. It happened at the perfect time of year. Hurt the threadfin population, but you know, threadfin are not native to Oklahoma. So it just happened to happen at a time of year where we felt like we were kind of coming out of winter. But if we would have got that in December or January, the same thing would have happened. So, you know, we're coming in now with these southwest winds, southern winds, lows. That's, again, the big thing. Don't get afraid of a north wind day 10 days from now. The second that we've stabilized water temperatures above 55 degrees, which is almost statewide about right now, getting pretty close. 10 more days of what we're dealing with, what's coming up on the weather, we are going to be anywhere from 62, 65 degrees in the southeast, all the way up to, you know, 55 to 58 degrees in the northwest in the next week or two, you know, next 10 days with this weather. So the big thing with fishing at this time of year is once the fish have committed, especially the ones that are not relying for inflowing water, like white bass, paddlefish, things that want to run up rivers, that need the rain, need the photo period of longer days, want those water temperatures to be at a certain deal. You know, they're really paying attention to all those factors. So are all the fish in the lake. But once those stabilize and they've made the decision, they don't have to run 10 miles up a river, 20 miles up a river, they go. So if you get a cold day that comes, you know, let's say 2 weeks from now, it's like, oh, it's going to be 50 degrees, 55 degrees, wind blowing out of the north, 10, 15 miles an hour. Don't let that discourage you. those can be some of the best days of the year because you have the water to yourself. Those fish will not turn around and swim back out to deep water when they've committed to the spawn at that point. They've moved back up. They might suck out a little bit into, the coves and the creek arms that they're in, but they're not going back out of the creek arm to the end of the lake. Once these water temps stabilize with the lows sitting 50 and higher, for me, 5 days in a row of that is good enough to say you need to fish every day. We currently have the next 10 days after tonight, tomorrow night, and Thursday night. So starting Friday night, moving forward, all of our lows in central Oklahoma are 50 degrees and above. So I take that as south of us, a couple degrees warmer, north of us, maybe a couple degrees cooler. But that's the range. That's what you're looking for, is 50 degrees for lows for 5, 6, 7 days in a row. That's it. That's going to get the crappie spawning. That's going to get the bass active. That's where you just, as much time as you can spend on the water. And at that point, don't let a cold north wind day blow like, oh, I'm not going to go today. Because that, again, those can be the best days of the year once those fish have committed to, spawning. Tips for smallmouth. Yes and no. Smallmouth are gonna look for really hard substrate, particularly flowing water. So like Arbuckle Lake, fish are probably gonna go up Rock Creek. They're gonna get up into that, that arm. They're gonna go up as far as they can go, which they can get a couple miles up that creek. That's where they're gonna look to spawn. They, like white bass, given the opportunity, smallmouth are going to go upriver to spawn. They're a riverine fish. Even the Tennessee strains that we have here, they still would prefer that flowing water. They need that oxygen to keep the eggs, from silting in and suffocating. But with smallmouth, they're going to spawn after largemouth. They're looking for much warmer water temperatures in Oklahoma than largemouth are looking for. And you want to focus lakes that do have smallmouth. Your big thing is hard structure. And if you have hard structure like rock bottom with some grass that grows on top of it, great places to look. And if you're fishing for smallmouth, especially this time of year, if they're not in the creeks and rivers, which is where I target them in the summer months, July, August, like I talked about, you want to go, drop shot for them, or a tube, something that you can keep at their level, but you're not really moving it that fast. So, something like these little, again, I think this is a Z-Man, California craw, the little baby TRD that they have, just a little stick worm. Any of these you can use as a drop shot, you could replace it, something a little thread fin, something more of a natural green pumpkin. Sometimes they'll just, hey, we're going to go after something bright and chartreuse today. That can work. And then obviously your classic whites. When you get into creeks and rivers for smallmouth, I pretty much stick exclusively to something like this. This is going to pick up as many fish as I need it to. But if I get into a big deep hole, I might work a 1/4 ounce tube, cast it out into the pool or deep run, slowly work it up, wait for a hit, let it fall back down, reel up the slack, slowly pull it up, wait for a hit. Something like this for smallmouth and largemouth and spotted bass in a creek. Again, you can cast this out, reel it straight back in, or cast it into the big deep pools, jig it back up. You can throw a drop. I like throwing a drop shot into a big pool. This way I know what my depth is the whole time. So I cast this into a pool and cobble bottom. That tungsten weight, I just, very slowly pick it up, but it keeps my bait at the same place the entire time. So when those fish are looking at those dump ins to those pools, that's where you can really get into some good fish. But if you're not familiar with smallmouth bass fishing in Oklahoma on reservoirs, if that's not something that you've taken the time to go do yourself, it's it's a very difficult thing, because the smallmouth population in the state is not overly abundant. We have lakes that have good populations like Latonka, like Skiatook. Arbuckle's got some big ones in it. And then there's all of our eastern lakes outside of Grand, outside of that system, they have smallmouth in them. But fishing for them in reservoirs is very, very difficult, unless you have physically gone and figured it out, or had gone out with a guide or gone out with somebody who knows how to do it. My recommendation for smallmouth is that is your filler fish in July and August. When it's the dog days of summer, go to the Blue River, go to the Upper Illinois, go to the Barren Fork. Great public access, miles and miles of wadable stream. And you can pick up, Barren Fork, you're going to catch 50, 60, 70 fish in a day. The biggest fish you're going to touch, maybe 16 inches. That would be a real big fish out of there. But you're going to catch 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s, 14s all day long, just about every cast. The Upper Illinois, basically from the turn where Flint Creek comes in all the way down to Horseshoe Bend, in the summer months, basically everything above the bridge right there. I think it's the 62 bridge in Tahlequah, 64 bridge. Everything above that, July, August, typically for fishing, try the middle of the week. You have, you get the floaters, but early May, the Upper Illinois is, you want to catch a stud smallmouth, before any day before Memorial Day weekend, before the floaters really get out there. You get some warm days starting towards the end of April. You can float that lower section from the bridge down to like Horseshoe Bend and pick up some really big fish that, are pushing up into the river to spawn. And then, as you get into May, you get fish up above. And it's also a great one to fish in October after the floaters are done. So kind of after that Labor Day, end of September, hot weather. But that's great. I mean, the spotted bass, smallmouth, Blue River, you can catch some really big smallmouth. You're not going to catch a lot. A good day on the Blue River is 4, 5, 6 smallmouth, but you're going to catch 40, 50, 60 spotted bass that are all 12 inches, in between picking up a really nice smallmouth. So that's kind of my philosophy. I know there's smallmouth in our lakes. I've never taken the time to go out there and do it for myself. So I'm not the expert on that subject matter, but if you can find them and you know where they're at, drop shots, tubes, natural colors, blacks and blues, greens, green pumpkin, red and black flake, you're going to pick up fish. But drop shot, keep it slow, keep it where they can get to it. And as they push up, maybe on Arbuckle, when they go to run up, you might be able to get into them thick with some spinner baits right at the mouths of those creeks. Same thing on 10 Killer, right at the mouth of the Illinois where it goes in. That's where I would probably try to target fish with some bigger baits, some jerk baits, something like that, or spinner bait. All right. Well, I think that's it. Speak now or forever hold your peace. I think we've gone about 15 minutes over. So if that's it, thank you all for coming. This is my favorite time of the year. We have our pond spring fishing course coming up April 13th, I believe. So there were some pond questions that came up on this, but basically if you want information to pond fish, I'm going to cover everything. Channel cats, crappie, sunfish, bass. For spring fishing, how to catch them all, how to go into the neighborhood pond from I caught one fish, this isn't much fun, to we're going to get you dialed in to where every time you go to your local pond, a few little different things. If these aren't working, the bite's not working, time to leave. But most of the time, I'll give a few lures and a few little tricks that you can go to anything under 2 acres and pretty much doesn't matter if it's pressured or not. So that'll be our next course. And then we have our sunfish course in May and our catfish course in June. And then I haven't written the schedule for the second half of the year yet, but we'll have one course a month, July through August. And I may throw in a special course if I can think of one here, maybe for Saugeye or something like that here in the next few weeks, because it is that time of year for us. So everybody, thank you for coming. Be safe, tight lines. If you go to our website, my information's available. Call me, text me, email me. If it's the weekends and you have a fishing question, don't think you're bothering me, because I'm probably out fishing too. I love to hear from anglers, love to talk to people. I learn something new every time I talk to one of you all. Hopefully you learn something new every time you talk to me, but we can't do these without you. We want to tailor these courses for you. If you ever think of a subject that you'd really love to hear about, for us to spend 2 hours on, please send those to me. This is our first year of doing these, so we've kept it very generic to this point, just species times a year. But if there's, we could spend 2 hours talking about drop shotting. We could spend 2 hours talking about jig fishing. We could spend, 2 hours talking about, one lure on a pond. So if there's ever anything that comes up, shoot it my way, text, phone call, email. These courses are for you guys. So let us know how we can better help you guys with fishing questions, fishing tips, where to go. So yeah, Gar will be a good one. We'll definitely have a Gar one coming up in the not too distant future. So, all right, with that, everybody take care. Have a great week. We'll see any of you signed up for our pond one. Otherwise, tight lines. Make sure to share any great photos you have or any friends, family. Go to our website at the dock, post your pictures. We love seeing those. But other than that, take care. Until next time.